Well, hello everyone. Welcome to the JOANNA WHALEY podcast. This week, I am coming to you live on a Sunday morning, a rare weekend when I did not have a gig. Coming to you live today on a Sunday morning. Decided, you know what? I'm gonna do some church right here in my house today. My name is JOANNA WHALEY. I'm the host of this podcast. For those of you joining live, welcome. This is a podcast that goes out to the world each and every week. I am a transgender woman who used to be a megachurch pastor for many, many years. And now I study queer theology. And so I am here today. But before, to kind of dive into some things, but before we get started, if you are a listener of the show and you're somebody who wants to support this podcast, you can go to patreon.com/JOANNA WHALEY for as little as $1 a month. You can join my Patreon and have direct access message with me, just like we can text. And so that's kind of become a support, to become a bit of a pastor to people online. And so you are welcome to join us there. That's really all the business I have today. Today I want to talk to you about a couple things. The seasons are changing. Where I live in Michigan, the colors are bursting. It's beautiful. And what I'm beginning to see is this beauty in the change of a season. And and a little backstory for those just joining us live. Again, I'm JOANNA WHALEY. I'm a former evangelical megachurch pastor, and I'm also a transgender woman. And before I came out as a trans person, I had basically what on paper looked like would be like the life, right? I worked at the big megachurch, had a great salary at these churches. Like when I say church, I don't mean robes and hymnals. I mean lights and smoke, rock and roll, lions, tigers, and bears. Oh my, that was my church. And that's where I pastored. And I had everything. I had the salary. I had the 401k. I had the whole, I had insurance. I had a captive audience of thousands every week in front of me at my church. And also, I had this weird talent of writing music. And I had songs all over Christian radio. And actually the band that I was on the radio with is still going today, just with a new singer. And so I had it all at one point in my life. And it all seemed to just be falling in place for me. And you would look at on paper that I had it together. I had everything you could ever want in life. Success, the marriage, the house, the job, the rock star status, if you will, playing in stadiums all the time. But all the while, there was this little thing going on in the background. I was a closeted trans person. And so I had to deal with this tension in my life of having all of this success, but also hearing the things that my dear friends in my churches were saying about LGBTQ people. And there was so much fear for me in honesty, because I knew what it might cost me. And when it all came crashing down in the end, which it did, I lost almost every bit of what looked like success that I had built up for years overnight. I lost the job, lost the 401k. There's really nothing in it. Lost the platform. Overnight, the songs were pulled from radio stations all over the country. My voice was erased from many platforms. simply for being trans. And if you want to know what despair looks like, that was the beginning of it for me. The beginning of despair came when that season ended. What I believe felt like a harvest, if you will. It felt like I had it all together. And it all came crashing down. And I began to circle the drain of despair and distress. Today I want to talk about, on the show, for those of you who are watching live, I said, are you skipping church today? How about some queer theology? I'm going to come at you today with some queer theology. I want to talk to you today about the cycle of seasons. Because they're real. They happen. And it also today kind of lands on a holiday that my Jewish friends celebrate called Sukkot, which is this week-long celebration of the fall harvest. And it also kind of like commemorates the 40 years that the Jewish people spent in the desert after escaping slavery in Egypt. And now I'm wildly overgeneralizing that because I'm not myself Jewish. So I will leave that to Jewish experts to dive into that. But it lines up with this season that many of my Jewish friends are in. And I am reflecting today on seasons and the cycle of them and how they interact with our world and our lived experiences. Because whether you want to admit it or not, your life and my life moves in seasons. And it's a real thing that we all have to grapple with. And it's a real thing that all of us have to come to terms with. So as we begin to unpack that, I won't leave you with the depression that my life circled the drain and like it all fell apart. This beautiful thing happened in my life. A very beautiful thing happened in my life. I ended up, when I came out and I transitioned, I ended up falling in love with this new line of spiritual work called chaplaincy in a hospital. I never knew it existed. I was just talking with a friend on her podcast about some of my experiences in it. And it needs to be said, I'm a resident, I'm a student of this field, and there's many well-qualified chaplains out there. But I'll share with you some of the things I'm learning as I walk into this journey as a queer person who still has to hold spiritual authority when seasons are changing for others. And so in the spirit of that, in the spirit of seasons, the first thing I want to say today is that fall, as I said earlier, is really beautiful. The colors are changing. The chlorophyll colors inside of the leaves are all shifting. It can be beautiful, but we also need to understand that what we're watching is death. Fall's beautiful, but what we're watching in front of our eyes is death. And I, as a person who works in spiritual care, I am absolutely surrounded by death each and every day in my new professional field. Every day. I am surrounded by death. I have seen it all in, the short amount of months that I have been working in spiritual care in clinical settings. I've seen it all. Maybe not all. I should not be so arrogant to think that I've seen everything, but I've seen a lot. I've seen death in some of the most beautiful ways you could imagine. I've seen really tough ones. I've seen tough cases of death. but I've also seen really beautiful ones as well. And there's this term that I've been learning inside of the field of spiritual care in clinical settings called meaning making. And there's moments where you're surrounded by people you love, and you walk into a situation where there's all kinds of people surrounding their loved one who's actively dying, and they don't know how to make meaning of it. Because those of us, humans, have a hard time making meaning of death at times. The Christian world calls it, theories of eschatology, theories of the end, theories of end times. I've talked about that on the show, but it also encompasses this idea of death and life after death. What do we make of it? What's the meaning that we make of it? And if you were hoping that I would give you an answer today, I hate to disappoint you. Because what I've learned as a queer theologian is that the more I study, the more that I try to understand and read these super thick books like this one, the more I read books like this that talk about the end of our lives, the less I seem to know. But to me, as a queer theologian, that brings me a lot of peace. I actually love having less of an answer. We've all been there when the tragedy strikes and someone says, God's got a plan. We've all been there. And like on paper, in a sermon on Sunday morning, it sounds great. But when you actually say that thing in the middle of a tragedy, it falls on deaf ears. I, as someone who works in spiritual work and am surrounded by death all the time, sometimes I don't try to answer the questions. I don't try to explain death and eternity and where this person has gone. I just try to bring meaning into the moment. And when you bring meaning into the moment of death, and when I'm talking about death, I'm not talking about always physical death. I'm also talking about like spiritual and like season of life change. If we try to answer it and try to understand the big, the forever picture here, sometimes we can miss the beauty of the fall. Sometimes we can miss the beauty of what is right in front of us. We really miss it because we're so worried. We're so worried about the death, or we're worried about what's going to happen after this, that we miss, I guess to steal this phrase, we miss the forest for the trees. We miss the beauty of fall right in front of us. So if we can find ways to make meaning in the middle of these moments where the season changes and we know that winter is coming, it can help us enjoy the beauty of the changing of season, and yes, even the death of a dream. I watched so many dreams die in my life when I came out as a trans person. So many dreams died. But what happened is that I began to try and live in the beauty of today and see the beauty of the leaves falling. And sometimes those leaves represent our dreams, our ambitions, our goals. I have on my bookshelf here volumes and volumes of journals. And in those journals is incredibly detailed goals that I used to have in my life. I mean, so many goals I detailed You know what's interesting? Since transitioning, since coming out, I haven't written down a single goal. Not because I'm not ambitious. If you've ever met me in the real world, you'll know I'm a very ambitious person. But what I've done is I've slowed down and I've experienced the changing of the seasons and tried to embrace and make meaning in the death of things. And that has really made space in my heart for much more beauty in the unknown. So these are important things that I've been learning. But after fall, what comes next? Winter. I live in Michigan. Winter at times feels like it is a billion years long. It just drags on and on and on. It just feels like it never ends where I live, right? Winter is just this long, dreary, like cold. And now that I live my life on hormones, on estrogen, I'm freezing in the middle of the summer. So now winter is like I'm just an ice cube, right? Pre-transition, I was always curious, like, why girls were so, like, cold all the time. I'm like, it's hot, But now I get it, because I am freezing all the time. So thank you, girls, for prepping me for that. But, I have so many women in my life who have helped me figure out womanhood, and that was one of the things that, I was warned, hey, just be ready. You're going to be cold a lot. So, anyways, I'm thinking about, the changing of the season. I know that winter's coming, and sometimes we need to understand that, did you know that things survive the winter? Shocking. Things actually survive the winter. How? When you look outside in the middle of the winter, it is just like desolate, frozen tundra everywhere. You look back there, the garden is just covered in snow. Nothing could survive that, right? Like, I can't even survive that. So how could these plants that I put out there survive? And I'm reminded of this story in Christian theology, in the Christian faith tradition, of Jesus talking about the sowing of the seeds. He tells these stories, calls these parables. He talks about parables. A pastor, a lot of my megachurch pastors try to explain it as, these earthly stories with heavenly meanings, That's one way I always heard it explained, and not like a perfect analogy, but I like it, so I'm going to use it. It's just kind of like earthly story with I'm going to call it like a spiritual eternal meaning. And Jesus is talking about this, some seed is thrown on the path. Hi, Nate. Nate says hello on live. It's nice to see you today. Some seed is thrown on the path. And it sprouts quickly, and then it dies once the summer season comes, right? Some of it falls into a patch of weeds. It sprouts up, but then the weeds, overtake it. But then some of it fell on good soil. And one thing I want to talk about is this parable in Christian tradition was always kind of used, honestly, sometimes as a weapon to say, look, we're better than everyone else because we're in good soil. We are Christians. We are believers. But I'm going to come with you today with this story from a queer perspective. I'm a queer theologian. Welcome to my podcast. But I'm going to tell you today that this story is not about who has figured their theology out. Kristen, nice to see you. I love this, and I love you too. Yes, she says it's so appropriate for her today. Yes, welcome. For those just joining me, I decided to do the podcast recording on a Sunday morning, probably during most church services, and it's kept a lot of stuff out of the chats today, so it's been kind of nice. So anyways, I'm going to submit to you today that this podcast, or this podcast, my podcast isn't that spiritual. This parable is not talking about, hey, be a Christian because that makes you better than all the other seed out there. I'm going to submit to you from a queer perspective that it's just about planting your seed for longevity of season. That's what I'm going to like throw out there. I'm going to throw that seed out there. And I think it's important to understand that even when those plants that grow up around the weeds, plants that grow up around weeds, plants that sprout up on the path, if you take the snapshot of a moment when they're all bloomed, it actually can be a very beautiful sight. I've talked about on this podcast before this garden that my grandma used to have. She called it God's garden. We just threw crap in that garden. There was no plan or order to that. Everything grew among the weeds, but it was always really beautiful. But every year it looked different, right? It looked different. There was nothing ever the same. But every year in the garden that we tended to and we put in good soil, those plants continued to grow over and over every year. But what I'm gonna challenge the Christianese thought on this is to say, this story is not talking about be Christian and be better. What it's trying to show us is enjoy the scene around you, but try to find a little patch of good soil for yourself so that you can have longevity, because the winter's coming. If your roots are low in the soil, that the winter is going to kill them. But if you can find a space among all the beauty around you where there's some good soil, you can put those roots down deep and you can grow back when winter ends. And these roots can continue to thrive for longevity. So next time you hear the parable of the seeds and think, I'm a Christian, I'm better than everyone else because I'm in good soil, just remember that it's not about being better than everyone else. It's about longevity. Weather can be harsh, right? But, and there's this amazing thing that happens in the changing of the seasons. If you look at the seasons, there's these astrological or astronomy terms that you've probably heard of, and you think it's about balancing an egg on its head, right? But these are actually from astrology or from astronomy, not astrology, astronomy. You got the vernal and autumnal equinox, and you have the summer and winter solstice, right? These are the changings of the season. But did you know how seasons change? Maybe you don't. Maybe you haven't been educated in astronomy. Great. I'm going to just throw a little bit out there. The only thing that changes a season is a 23.4 degree tilt. 23.4 degrees of tilt is what changes a season. It's not very much. It's not a full 180. It's not 90. 90 degrees would be a lot, right? We would think like, okay, we're trying to like make a turn here. But what if you just veer the course a little bit? If the course veers just a little bit. 23.4 degrees makes all the difference between summer and winter. And before you get super depressed, be like, oh gosh, I can't control these little things. You could get really tempted to say, I got to stay the course. I got to stay the course. But what I'm telling you is that seasons are in cycles, and it's okay, and it's a natural thing when things move just a little bit. It can change what season you're in, but really what it can do is just change your perspective. Because even in these astronomy, in the world, right, on Earth, wherever you're standing in that 23-degree shift can change your perspective and let you see the universe in a totally different way. Did you know that, like, in certain seasons of the year, you can see different constellations and stars? The sun is at a different angle. It all changes based on that slight change and tilt. A little bit of change will change a season, but it's natural. It's a natural cycle. But I want you to be patient with yourself. And remember that growth will return. That 23.4 degrees is going to move again. It's going to change again. And then eventually the frost thaws. Kristen says, I'll be planting a God's garden starting this fall. Do it. It's actually beautiful and can remind you of the diversity of humanity. It can let you enjoy people who don't look like the perfect garden. There are times in my life I don't look like the perfect garden. But if it's a God's garden, it can be really beautiful just by enjoying what you see. But I want to encourage you to put your roots deep into where you are. Because winter's coming. It's going to frost over. The harvest might end. The good times may come to a close. Your goals may shift by just a little. By 23.4 degrees. And it could change the whole path of your life. But if you put those roots in when it warms up and the ice thaws, you may begin to sprout again. And I don't know if you've ever seen in the spring when things sprout, they're beautiful. It's like this beautiful these little buds coming out of the ground. And when you see them, they don't look like much. They can be stomped on if not cared for. But they're beautiful when they grow and they grow. But remember, it might grow, and then a slight change in your path may change the season again. But know that it's a cycle. These things change over time, over and over again. The cycles will come and they will go. So I just want to invite you to kind of like take a look. What season are you in? Are you in summer? Great. I'm so happy for you. If you begin to see the colors changing in your summer, the path shifting just a little bit, just know that you might see a total change in what you see around you, but it's a beautiful thing and it's a natural thing. The season will change. If you are someone who is in springtime and you're like, oh my gosh, everything's beautiful. It's so beautiful. Like everything is growing again. Enjoy it. Enjoy the beauty that comes in that moment. Maybe you're someone who, I'm going backwards if you can tell. Maybe you're in a winter right now and you feel it's just desolate and bare and gross and nothing seems to feel